Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Please find your way to some seats. There's a bunch down here in the front as well. Welcome, everyone. And good afternoon. I am Sarah Rosenwortel, and I have the great privilege to be the president of the Urban Institute and to say thank you to all of you for spending your afternoon with us. We're really excited to have you here for what we're calling the first ever Giving Innovation Summit at the Urban Institute, which is designed for us to draw attention and highlight many ways in which charitable giving is changing in this country and the forces that are behind that change. It's at a particularly important and kind of inflection point moment in our nation's history. Public policy is changing. I suspect, we'll see anybody know what's going on in the House right now? I'm not sure. But public policy is changing a lot, and I suspect will continue to change over the next couple of years in ways that will give probably more flexibility, but also probably less resources to state and local governments to achieve important social outcomes, including providing a social safety net for many in America. In fact, at Urban, we're going to be spending a lot of our time in the next period ahead making sure that we understand what those changes are happening, being able to try to help model and inform the decision-making about those changes with an understanding of possible consequences, but also, as we have more discretion at the local and state level, understanding what's happening and finding measures of well-being and trying to understand those consequences. And one of the important audiences for that, as communities are changing, is helping to inform how both nonprofits and philanthropy respond to big changes. So the forum we have today about how philanthropy is changing is a particularly, I think, important conversation to be had in light of possibly people looking to philanthropy for ever more expanded roles. Private giving is, of course, an important complement to public policy for meeting the needs of families and communities. And as we've seen, people also look to nonprofits, and philanthropists make major investments in helping give voice to people in public discussions, as well as a recent run-up in the fundraising of some very notable organizations has suggested. Private investing for social impact is also continuing to emerge as a really important mechanism for funding community change. And when done right, that kind of social impact investing can be a mechanism that allows for different voices to be at the table than when we've done this through a traditional policy mechanisms to help shape the nature of those investments and how they work in communities so that the residents of those communities can play a greater role. Private giving and private investing also allow individuals to play a role in shaping their own communities and the opportunities of the residents of those communities that in ways technical difficulties, in ways that can help create new opportunity literally for people in their own hometowns. At Urban, we hope to try to bring evidence and analysis to bear to inform on all of these practices and showcase all of these different topics that we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a kind of quick snapshot of each of these different topics in the discussion and then bring all of you in to talk further. Our first panel is going to focus on varied innovations to expand charitable giving by more and more people, and then the second will focus on how we expand options for different kinds of capital to be deployed philanthropically. You have bios, and I think there'll be further introductions by some of the panelists, but I just want to take a moment to note that the panels will each be moderated by two of Urban's own, Gustavo Velasquez and Solomon Green. They both have backgrounds as practitioners in the nonprofit and philanthropy sectors, and they bring that expertise to the conversation as well. Gustavos is in week 3, I think, of his tenure at Urban, and he's now leading what we call our Washington Area Research Initiative. He led the Fair Housing Division at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development previously, but he also has helped to lead a number of NGOs and ran the D.C. Office of Latino Affairs and the Office of Human Rights in the district. So very deep experience in working with the philanthropic sector. Solomon's research focuses on how land use and housing policy can improve access to opportunity for vulnerable groups. and how data and technology can help support more inclusive urban development, both topics that Philanthropy has been increasingly investing in. He's worked in government and also for one of our country's largest philanthropies, the Open Society Foundation. So great assets that we're bringing to this conversation as well. I can say immodestly as a proud mother of sorts of the place. Before I turn this over to the rest of the program, I want to welcome also those of you who are online and watching. This will be web streamed and available to a webcast audience, and we encourage you all to continue the dialogue that you hear in the audience by joining a conversation in social media using the hashtags #LiveAtUrban or hashtag #GivingInnovation. Be sure to include the Twitter handles for the speakers that you're referencing their comments, and we've gotten good now about including those on your agendas or on the website if you're following along at home. In the spirit of inclusivity as well, we're going to have a conversation that's going to start with our panelists, but we want to bring everyone in. And so please think about, and you can do this as you're tuning in the webcast, there's going to be opportunities for questions. You can send us your questions in advance to events@urban.org, and we'll hand those up to the moderator for the Q&A portion of the program. Today's event has been made possible by the Gate Foundation's Philanthropic Partnerships team, and I think we have Nikki there. Welcome. And very happy to have you and very grateful for their work to try to inspire increased giving by all people. This is the first public event since Sheena Ashley has joined the Urban Institute. Sheena is our now director of the Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy, who is leading this work and leading, I think, a very exciting new body of work here at Urban, and I couldn't be more thrilled and more proud of having her here. And she will share a few thoughts about the context behind this event and some of the new research work that will soon be coming from the Urban Institute. Please join me in welcoming Sheena, and thanks for being here.
Sarah, I recognize that I'm standing between you all and this rich panel, so I'm not going to take much time, but do want to thank Sarah for her great leadership here at the Urban Institute. It's a unique space where she has created the opportunity for all of us to bring evidence to bear on understanding both how public and private resources can be used for moving forward social impact. And so we are grateful to have her great leadership here. Thankful to all of you who have joined us, all the many new faces in the room and people in the city who care about giving and philanthropy. It's great to have people joining us on the webcast as well, and I'm honored that you took the time to join us for what I expect will be a really interesting conversation around what we're calling giving innovations. And to wrap a little bit around that concept, which is terminology that we're throwing out there to also get your feedback on to see if that resonates in the field, I just want to take a little bit of time to explain what we mean here at Urban by giving innovations. Around giving innovations, we mean the many ways in which people are iterating or inventing approaches that either serve to broaden participation in giving or expand the pathways for people to give. To us, it is as much about the technologies driving those changes in giving as it is about recognizing age-old traditions of giving. I'm sure we can all relate to this idea that the giving landscape is changing. There is more awareness around giving. We now have Giving Tuesday as a global movement for giving, and just about every city around the country has its own giving day, like Give Miami Day. Miami. It's become even simpler to give. I can now give by texting or tweeting, right? And the forms of monetary giving have expanded greatly. I can give old-fashioned cash now, use a check, swipe my credit card, or I can give digital currency, like a Bitcoin. And donors now have access to so much more information to guide those giving decisions. Our friends at GuideStar allow you to get access on the information of the organizations, or we can now get references from our peers. Our team here at the Urban Institute is particularly interested in understanding these dynamics to better inform policy decisions at the federal, state, and local levels that have the potential to profoundly affect this giving. And we are fortunate to have the great modeling capacity of our colleagues here at the Tax Policy Center to help us deliver timely and trusted data into these important debates. But as we've been doing this work, we have recognized how hard it is to keep track of this changing landscape. To help with this, we have compiled a set of indicators across many sources of giving reports into what you picked up today. It's this little dashboard that we've released. We also asked our very own Ben Soskis, who's in the back of the room, to conduct some historical research to provide some context to how we have come to measure giving in the ways that we do in the United States. We've made printed copies available of this dashboard, and you will also be able to find it on our website to those who haven't joined us in person. Now today, with this summit, we wanted not only to bring attention to the ways in which giving is changing, but we also want to showcase the people who are driving that change. And I think you're going to be excited to hear about their organizations and what they're doing. Our great lineup of panelists are representative of the pioneers and innovators that are pushing at the leading edge, and they are forcing us to rethink the fundamentals of giving. They are bringing new platforms and concepts to make things like payment processing, boring payment processing, and peer influence simpler, and are showing how things like crowdfunding and bizarre things like impact investing can be connected to our philanthropic impulse. More importantly, they all connect to what I see as the fundamental importance of giving. They understand that these innovations are not simply about increasing the size of the giving pie, which is important. They also understand that there is power and determination in the act of giving. Philanthropic giving is not only about the exchange of dollars. Giving is also a tangible expression of values. It's a way of giving voice to one's role as part of a community of caring. And therefore, it's not just about what or how much we give. It's also about who gives and how they give that matters. Whether we choose to give online or to give directly to a person in our neighborhood, when we make those choices, in the same way that we choose to express our values through eating locally or buying American or voting, we are doing so in part as a means of identifying with a notion of the public and of defining and shaping the allocation of scarce resources within that public. We therefore understand that charitable giving is an essential element of our public process, and it is something to be encouraged and rewarded and participated in that vein. And it is deeply rooted in the American tradition that everyone gets to participate as a donor. And to the extent that we can expand and enrich our notion about who gives and how people give and what constitutes charitable giving, we also expand and enrich our notion of what philanthropy is all about. And equally importantly, who gets to wear the label of being a philanthropist. It is this process of expanding and enriching our notion of charitable giving that we are here today to celebrate and to enrich. And what makes this particularly exciting, and I dare say hopeful to me, is that the new forms of giving we are seeing today are infused with a spirit of innovation whose full potential is barely beginning to be seen. So as we weave together with this summit, the spirit of giving and the spirit of innovation, let's be excited about what we're doing today and its possibilities. But let's also think critically and intelligently about it. As powerful as charitable giving is, and Sarah spoke to this, and as powerful as it can be, I recognize that it cannot be a complete substitute for government. private giving doesn't work at the necessary scale to function as social insurance or to meet all our demands for public goods. What it can do, though, is invent, transform, innovate, and lead. If we feel our government isn't moving fast enough or innovative enough in a particular space, or is overlooking the most vulnerable or needy, what we have seen and what we are seeing more of in private giving is that there is space to invent and transform and foster community responses to the emergent and dynamically changing needs that we see on the ground. And with that, that context, I would like to kick off and get started with our first panel and ask the panelists and Gustavo to take the lead. Thank you all. I appreciate you being here.
Good afternoon. Again, welcome to the Urban Institute. Glad that you all were able to join us this afternoon. We have heard from our inspiring leader here at Urban, Sarah Rosen-Wortel, and our extremely dynamic director of the Center for Nonprofit and Philanthropy, Sheena Ashley. And now it is time to turn to the first of two panels that we have prepared for you today. They will both be terrific conversations, I promise you. I have here on the stage joining me three inspiring women who are doing terrific, innovative work in the field of democratizing giving, which is the topic of our panel. I'm going to introduce them and ask them to speak for a few minutes about their work and their story. But I want to take just a moment to introduce myself first. I'm Gustavo Velasquez. I am the director of the Washington Area Initiative here at the Urban Institute. Sarah is indeed correct. Not my third week, my second week here at Urban. And the only reason why I say that again is just in case I make a monumental mistake, and I have every reason to justify it. So thank you again for being here. So the Washington Area Initiative is a cross-center and multidisciplinary program here at Urban devoted to work with civic and government leaders, with the nonprofit community, with practitioners, with funders, and with really the community at large to provide evidence, to provide analysis, to provide recommendations, ultimately to solve some of the most complex problems affecting the residents and the workers of the District of Columbia and the larger metro area. Using data and analytical insights, a group of researchers have built a robust body of work for many years on many policy domains, working on behalf of stakeholders across the region dedicated to see this city and this metro area continue to grow in a very vibrant, prosperous way, but making sure that that prosperity is shared among all communities. The inclusive growth that we all talk about and that we all desire in the metro area. And speaking about things that benefit all communities, this is a good segue to talk about democratizing giving, the challenges, the opportunities of that, the practices currently underway, the potential for expanding that field. And I want to give all of you a quick reminder that if you're in the room, you will have the opportunity to answer the panelists' questions directly in a few minutes. If you are watching us via webcast, there is an email address that you can submit your questions to, and that is events@urban.org, events at urban.org. Also, for those of you who are live tweeting, the hashtag to follow this discussion is #LiveAtUrban, which is on your screen, #LiveAtUrban, as well as #GivingInnovation. #LiveAtUrban and Giving Innovation, for those of you that are live tweeting. So, when I think about the issue of expanding giving, democratizing giving, I think about three spectrums, three aspects of this. First one is the aspect of giving planning. In other words, are we seeing that more communities in the wide spectrum of populations, backgrounds, incomes are thinking more and more today about giving? Is that something that is moving in a trajectory of growth, giving planning? In the same way that people think more and more conscientious today about retirement, for example, are we seeing more people being more conscientious about giving across all the spectrums? The second aspect will be access to giving. And that very much is tied to the methods. Are we having the methods to have more participation, to broaden the participation of more people, again, across the spectrum of populations around giving? And the third will be, I think, about a more complex topic, which is giving decision making. And that is probably a topic more for perhaps a panel of funders, but it goes to the heart of also, are we, when we're thinking about giving, but also grant making, are we having everybody at the table, the right participation across all communities at the table when that grant making is being decided? So planning, access, and decision making. Our guest today will discuss the innovations that you are involved in this field, making giving, again, more inclusive, making giving more accessible and more accountable to all communities. We have here in my immediate left Ann Whitley Canella, who is the Vice President of Global Impact. Thank you, Ann, for being here. We also have Ebony Johnson Cooper, Ebony at the far left, who is the founder of Young, Black, and Giving Back Institute. Thanks, Ebony, for being here. And last but not least, Holly Lee, who is the founder of the Asian Women Giving Circle. We're going to give everyone, starting with you, Ann, a few minutes to talk about what brought you to this work, talk about what is it that you're doing currently that is in this area of innovation in democratizing giving and the impact that you're having in the work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting us to be on the panel. Global Impact, just to give you a little sense of Global Impact, is a 60-year-old organization. Our mission is to grow global philanthropy. And our wonderful CEO, who's seated in the back, challenged the executive team to come up with a solution that truly democratized the idea of philanthropy. And how do we put the same tools that major philanthropists have into the hands of every person everywhere? And so our innovation to doing that, and I don't know if I can hit the slides right now, is called Grow Fund. And Grow Fund is essentially a personal foundation for every single person everywhere. It is the first of its kind product on the market. It is a donor-advised fund with money that can be invested at the first dollar. So in a typical situation, if you were a major philanthropist and you wanted to actually invest your money at the same time you were thinking and planning about giving, you would actually have to set aside $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 in order to be able to go open up an account at Fidelity or Schwab or one of the big donor-advised funds. And so this innovation actually breaks that down and disrupts it completely by saying you can set up an account for free and your money can be invested at the first dollar. In terms of impact that we hope to have, Global Impact is a nonprofit. I think what, in your opening remarks, you talked about planning and access. And I certainly think access is a big piece of Grow Fund, providing access to tools that were once only available to wealthy individuals. But for me, in my personal passion, the planning piece is as important, and I resonated a lot with your opening remarks, because I think in planning, you transform yourself. So as we led up to launching the product, I had the opportunity to do about 20 plus individual interviews with who we thought our target market would be. The majority of them were women of a certain level of spending ability, sort of mid-level career, and had this ability and could be strategic with their giving. And what I found across the board, 100%, was that they were not. So they didn't have the tools to actually be able to plan their giving. Not that they weren't giving, what they were doing was giving because somebody asked, or giving in an ad hoc manner, or giving because they were personally connected to a child that had been, those types of things. So when we asked, what are you passionate about? Well, I'm passionate about women and girls. Well, what are you giving to? Well, I'm giving to an autism organization because my best friend's son has autism. That was the kind of stories we heard over and over again. So, thanks to the Gates Foundation and thanks to other partners of ours, we now with this product have the opportunity to actually inform that strategic planning process and allow people to save with a simple premise is, what if you had money and you could give to the causes that were important to you? So I'll just show a little tiny bit of the product. We have a number of featured giving opportunities. You can go on to it. I won't do a complete commercial, but it's microfund.org. And it simply looks right now in its current form as a 401k might look. But there's 800,000 charities that you can give to thanks to GuideStar. So a little bit about what we're doing.
Okay. And would you say that this, before we move on, would you say that these innovations are driven by how the technology is changing so quickly, or are actually donors? Are we saying that donors themselves are changing the way that giving is growing and expanding?
Well, I think, it's an interesting question, because in our market where I see the most potential, those donors are not driving innovation necessarily because they've actually never been taught how to give. And there's not that there aren't strategic donors out there in all generations, but some of the things that sort of we've been taught as fundraisers or marketers or strategic consultants, whatever we are very simple things like, millennials, if you get them to volunteer, they'll give. Well, not always the case, So in this case, I think what is driving some innovation is also really passionate humanitarians who are looking at all of these major trends and bringing things together in a way that we think, in this case, will be disruptive to the market. And sometimes disruptive is not driven by the users. Sometimes it's driven by people with really good ideas. So that doesn't quite answer, it's not sort of an either or question in my mind.
Holly, tell us about your work.
Sure. What an amazing tool. That's so useful to my giving circle and lots of giving circles. It's really great. My name is Holly Lee, and I'm the founder of the Asian Women Giving Circle. It's really nice to be here. Thank you so much to Sarah and Sheena and Keely. I'm going to get my Twitter lesson from you before I leave. DC, Daphne, Joyce, and all at the Urban Institute for this wonderful day. I founded the Asian Women Giving Circle 11 years ago with a bunch of friends, and it occurs to me as you were talking, Anne, that I'll get to this a little later, but giving circles are a really natural place for people to hone their giving, because like many of us, always, I would respond to an appealing appeal, or my buddy would ask me to come to this gala or run in this walkathon or whatever. But I was not really that strategic about my giving. But if you're in a circle of friends and peers and people you respect and share values with, you have to kind of argue with them, and you have to make your case, and you have to make your point and try to win the day. So that's a way of forcing in a natural ecosystem a form of strategic thinking about how one gives. So it also occurs to me the title of today is the Giving Innovation Summit. One of the impetuses for me to start the Asian Women Giving Circle was I was in a ge. And a ge is a Korean cultural concept that exists in many, many cultures. We were talking back there. Tandas in Mexico, ges in Korea, very similar. It's basically a shared saving circle. I can tell you about it after our talk. It exists in every culture. Susus, tandas, souls, suks. A couple years ago, I met an Eritrean woman who told me about mahabers and iders. It's the same idea in her culture, but specifically for funerals in one case and specifically for weddings in another. And as we know from a lot of our heritages, those are family occasions when one needs to come up with and move a lot of money. So I would be fascinated to know more about how much money is being held and moved in immigrant communities in all of our cities in this country in these cultural concepts, which are ancient. So the cool thing about a Giving Innovation Summit is that in my case, and I'm sure in many of you in the audience, we have these ancient cultural traditions of saving and giving, but now you can do it with a freaking cell phone. You know, like the innovation is the tool that you can use to accomplish some of the same goals that our ancestors and our cultures and our people have been doing for centuries. So that was one thing. I was also the executive director of a domestic violence provider in the Korean community in Queens. And I learned firsthand how hard it is to raise money from Korean people for this issue in particular. So far, we've raised $800,000 in a very grassroots way at the Asian Women Giving Circle, all in New York City, all raised by Asian American women, all going to Asian American women in the city who are using the tools of arts and culture to bring about progressive social change. So what are we trying to do? I mean, basically, one thing we're trying to do is just move more resources into our communities of need. The model minority myths notwithstanding, Asian American communities receive less than 0.5% of our philanthropic dollars while experiencing high levels of poverty, depression, and suicide, lack of access to resources, in addition to the whole array of issues that come up for immigrants, non-English speakers, and non-white new Americans. Second, we really wanted to raise the visibility of everyday Asian American women doing philanthropic work. Who cares about that? Like, why is that even important? Well, it's important to me because if you think about moving money and moving resources and organizing those resources, philanthropy is a form of civic engagement from which many people in our country have felt historically excluded. Every single one of us is a philanthropist and can be seen as a philanthropist, and we are in our daily lives. Doing philanthropy in this way, is in a grassroots way, based in community, with pals, is activism. The impact on the individuals in my giving circle, and research bears this out, each of us gives away way more than we were giving away before. We're way more strategic about our giving because we have to make the case with our buddies in the room. These are long, loud, boisterous conversations to make your case for the projects that I want to fund. I'm going to go to the mat for this one. We are way more knowledgeable about the cool and amazing projects being done in our most local communities, and we're having way more fun doing this together than me and my husband in our kitchen not talking about this. The impact on our immediate community is really nothing less than life-changing. Remember a few summers ago there were a series of really brutal rapes and murders of young women in India. Immediately, we received and funded projects that responded to these horrible crimes with projects that addressed sexual and gender violence against women, particularly immigrant women in New York City. And because we fund with an arts lens also, they were really cool. They were graphic novels, they were documentary films. One was a street protest involving music and cultural tambourines. As another example, we were the only funder who wasn't a blood relative of a project that integrated for the first time and now forever LGBTQ people as participants in the official Lunar New Year parade in Chinatown. We hope to have bigger impact too. Potentially, we're joining forces with other Giving Circle networks to think tank how to deepen and broaden and sustain our grassroots philanthropic work. What's next? How do we grow this movement? So many ideas, and I'm sure we'll have a rich conversation about this later, but one of the things we were talking back there is there has been this incredible, spontaneous bubbling up of hyper-local groups. I'm sure you're part of them. I'm sure you're aware of them. Just in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, like literally 10 groups of neighbors, moms, whatever. This is a golden age of activism. Imagine if all of these groups monetized, even a small amount. Imagine if all of these groups started to organize some of their money. Each of these people is giving away money to organizations that they care about. What if those little local, hyperlocal groups organize a portion of that money? Think about the potential energy in those thousands of groups that have sprung up all over our country. We're thinking at the Giving Circle about how best to work with community foundations to grow giving circles within their orbits, challenging the community foundations to raise matching dollars, hosting them if they wish. In exchange, they get to take credit for growing philanthropy in communities they care about, and they get to take some credit for growing a community of grassroots activists, and then they get to learn about really cool hyperlocal issues that are affecting their neighborhoods of care. We're really inspired by the idea of wealthy and everyday givers inspiring each other and being in the same roof together, potentially matching dollars, potentially sharing grant making, and potentially sharing, for sure, sharing stories and inspiration. We've been dreaming about an easy-to-use and lively online platform for the Giving Circle community, and potentially it's sitting right here. I'm gonna take a look at it later.
That sounded like you were already in.
Pretty cool. Could happen right here. So basically, the Giving Circle takeaway, I think, is that you do not have to be rich to move money. You do not have to be rich to organize money. In fact, each of us is doing it already, I bet. Every Giving Circle, whether it's raising and giving 1,000 or 1,000,000, is moving money in community. And plus, they're way more fun than doing it on your own. So thank you. Yeah. I'm looking forward to learning more about this.
Yes, thank you. We'll remind you that we'll have some Q&A session in a minute. And for those of you watching via webcast, events@urban.org is how you submit your questions. Let's move to Ebony and talk about the very exciting work that you're doing.
Yes. So I was actually sitting here excited because Hallie, we are two unapologetic organizations, you supporting the Asian women, and our organization being unapologetic about helping young Black professionals be better at what we do in the community. And so I too am in a Giving Circle here in DC, and I find that communities of color, it's natural for us to give within our community. So Giving Circles are amazing. One of my Giving Circle member friends is sitting over there. And so, yes, I'm a huge advocate and proponent of Giving Circles. And particularly because in the African American community, philanthropy doesn't traditionally look like, as it was said earlier, who wears that label, right? So traditionally we see philanthropists as old, white, wealthy men. And now today we are changing that frame. Like you said, anyone can give, but when you use the word philanthropist, oftentimes it still has that same association. And so for a number of years, I've been working towards changing what that looks like and changing the association with philanthropy, or philanthropists rather. And so at the Young Black and Giving Back Institute, yes, we are unapologetically Black, and we intentionally are that way because it's very rare for organizations to focus on developing my peer group to be civic leaders, right? So when we think about training grounds and professional development, very, very rarely do I ever hear a call out for minority leaders. And I think that's important, particularly for organizations that serve communities that look like me, right? So if you serve an Asian community, whether you serve a Latino community or you serve an African American community, those in which you're serving, what do your organizations look like? What does your board look like? What does your staff look like, donors, et cetera? And so for me, it's a sort of personal goal of mine to make sure that organizations that serve us can aptly say, you know what, there are a pool of young, well, maybe not young-ish, Black folks that we can look to be within our leadership. And so that's important to me. And the way that the Institute came about was from an educational standpoint. So we convene Black professionals in intimate settings to train, to increase the opportunity to learn, to think, to build from one another, as well as industry leaders. And so we've had the opportunity to work with BoardSource. Actually, one of our board members is the CGO over at BoardSource. We've had board trainings. We talk about capacity building. We talk about things like policy and how that impacts philanthropy. And so whether that's through our biannual Changing the Face of Philanthropy Summit, or through our Philanthropy Breakfast series that we just held earlier this month, and we'll be holding another one in May, by bringing industry leaders. For example, we had Anna Barber, who is at the new African American Smithsonian, come and talk about what it means to be a fundraiser. And so for us and for our organizations, fundraising is huge, right? So how do we do that? How do we do that efficiently and effectively? And what better way to learn than from one another? And so I'm very proud of the fact that whenever we have speakers and whether we have folks come in to train, they look like us, right? So we know that there's an opportunity for us to be executives and leaders in this space, and that we can learn from one another. So at the Institute, our goal is really to equip and empower and engage those leaders who are emerging in the civic space. And so I'm very excited about the work. I would say impact would be, having a reservoir of organizations to look to, whether they are looking for donors, whether they're looking for board members, or even volunteers for that matter, that can help them to be more impactful in the work that they're doing. And so we also do research. We're working on a research project now so that we can have relevant information about how we give, because it is different than mainstream giving. And so it excites me, and I'm excited to be here and share more.
Tell us a little bit about the generational differences or similarities that you're finding, and also how are you finding that change?
Sure. I have decided that I want to bury the word millennial because I am so tired of it. It's been one of those words that's been around a long time. And at first, it's a great buzzword. Ooh, millennials, new generation. And it's, for me, everyone's a millennial now. If you're 14, you're a millennial. It's like, no, they're not. And so I think that there are lots of stereotypes about the generation who are arguably now 20 to 35, 36, somewhere in that range. And I think that the assumptions that are made about the millennial generation that I sit in at the higher end applies sometimes, and sometimes they don't, right? We're not a monolithic group of people. But nonetheless, when it comes to giving, I believe you may have said it earlier in terms of, if millennials volunteer, they might give. Yeah, I mean, yes. But generally speaking, we are an organization. We are a generation that takes initiative, right? We are very crafty, and we are right now generation. So if there's a problem, there's something or needs to be solved, we're innovative in getting it done, right? So whether it's through technology, whether it's through grassroots organizing, that's who we are as a generation. And then when you look, if you start to then break down the generations, which is at the Institute, part of the reason why we do research that focuses on Black givers, or young Black givers, that is, because the things that we focus on that matter to us may be a little bit different than sort of the mainstream research that we look at. So be that education, be that women and girls, seeing the things that matter to us. And so, but I think overall, when we look at the millennial generation, we are right now, we're a very caring generation. When we give, we may not give in large numbers, but overall, we have been proven to give more, even if it's in smaller amounts. So, yeah.
And what are you seeing through Growth Fund in terms of differences of, generational differences, other demographics? What are you experiencing?
Well, I think what's interesting, and Ebony started to touch on this, is for millennials, you're hitting such a wide range, and applying a lens of what's happening in their life during that time is also really important. So what a 20-year-old might be looking at, a 35-year-old woman or a 35-year-old parent is going to be in a completely different frame of mind. They're probably, two working partners in a household, very busy. If there's a volunteer experience, it might be just at the PTA. It's a completely different a mindset. I think that what we're seeing in general, though, in terms of behavior pattern on the platform is especially for, I would say, higher end millennials and sort of mid-level Gen X, is that the money is actually flowing through. So, our platform is something where you could save. So you could literally save all your money and spend it in 10 years if you wanted to. But there seems to be a very interesting pattern of actually saving up to $500, $1,000, which is great because that gets you to be sort of a different type of donor than a $25 or $50 donor, and then giving that out with some strategy. I'll tell you a really quick story, which is my daughter, who is 13, has given to the Wildlife Fund for her birthday for, 4 or 5 years instead of getting gifts. But what that's meant to us is that every year on her birthday, we get 500, it feels like, little baby seals, stuffed animals. Do you know what I mean? Because all of her friends are making $50 donations and we're getting seals, which she still has all of them, by the way. But by using a product like GrowFund, what she was able to do for the first time this year is actually set up a GrowFund account, have all of her friends give to that account, and then give the World Wildlife Fund one check of $1,500. That completely transforms her relationship, and it completely transforms their view of her as well. So one of the things that I've been really keen to think about is not just what's next gen, sort of what's millennials, what's Gen X, what are our baby boomers doing, but how are we building a legacy of philanthropy, and how do we start to teach the parents of today to begin to build that up through the generations that are coming above and beyond, because the next generation is just as demanding with philanthropy as well, and there's tools out there for them, and there's tools all the way up for wealthy philanthropists. So,
Holly, you were talking earlier about giving circles, and I remember very much my family very immersed in the tandas process as a mechanism for saving. You were talking about the impact that in particular your giving circle is having in New York. How do we raise awareness that these things are happening in these very entrenched cultural circles, immigrants and others? How do we raise awareness? How do we communicate that this is happening and that is having the level of impact that you are seeing in your own?
I think that's the million-dollar question, right? Like, how do we get it all, bring it all together? I mean, these are incredible stories. We were kind of joking in the back that a Korean ge and a Mexican tanda, they don't charge interest. Like, you pool your money, like if we're all in one big ge. And there's some ges in Queens that are moving like $100,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because if you're a new immigrant, maybe you're not here totally legally or you've overstayed, you don't really get banking. But you get a ge. Like, if you're in a Korean community and you're in Queens, you understand a ge. And some of these, I've never been part of one of these ges. I've only been part of frivolous, like, shopping ges with my girlfriends, honestly. They're really fun, but it's not a high bar. But some of these big ges in Queens, people can buy houses or start businesses or send a kid to college with some of the money that's accumulated. And we were sort of joking, I've heard of some other of these cultural shared saving systems where people take turns being kind of the boss of the pot, and there's interest charged. So if you put in $100 and it's your turn to get that $100 back a year later, you might get to take out $110. So we were sort of joking that the Koreans and the Mexicans aren't that smart to have figured out that, but that's just a joke. But I would love to know more about the money that we're talking about in America, like even removing the billions of dollars that are sent in remittances back home, even removing that. I'd love to know more about how much money we're talking about in our cities in America.
Is there someone tracking that? I mean, I follow the remittances movement for a long time.
I don't actually know. Do you guys
but
know?
when we're talking about within cities, domestically, is
No.
there someone who's struggling?
I think when we think about ethnic communities, how we've survived, we are survivors, right? Because we take care of ourselves. And I think that you were talking about susus. I've never been a part of one. I think I'm just too young. But, you know, my parents and things like that. Or you think about the numbers runners. I grew up in Harlem. You know, all of these different ways to sort of keep things in community. And I grew up in Brooklyn and Harlem. If you're familiar with the Hasidic Jewish community, they live in this very insular community, Bedford Avenue and sort of over in Marcy. And for, I'd probably say maybe 2-3 miles, about 20 blocks, it's nothing but Hasidic Jews. And, you know, they move their money in the community, very rarely going out of it. There was a research that went out a couple years ago that for every $11, like it went through each of the communities. And so the Jewish community was at the top in terms of how much their money moves. It turns over like 11 times before it hits the mainstream community. And so when you think about, and it then went down from there, Latinos, African Americans, et cetera. And so when you think about how we're able to take care of one another, you know, I've never even heard of a guy, but I know that in Queens, it's a huge Asian community. And so I think about giving and philanthropy from that particular standpoint as we have been able to take care of one another and sustain one another when sort of big government and big policy is not thinking about us, right? You know, you mentioned folks who may have overstayed or however their time here and can't afford to go home or whatever the case may be. There are a lot of those stories that we will probably never hear. And so I think that while we don't know, part of me doesn't want the secret to get out, right? I think that there's a part of it that stays in our communities for a reason, and everybody doesn't have to know everything about our business. And so I'm excited that we're keeping each other afloat and we're moving the money around, and perhaps for nonprofits and larger organizations, for example, like a giving fund, absolutely. You know, I think we should tell that story and talk about it, but perhaps some of the other things that have kept us alive and kept so many of our families afloat for such a long time, maybe we don't need to know. Maybe that's a secret that we should hold on to, because once the secret's out, that's it. Then everybody wants a piece of it, and we can't afford that.
Yeah.
So
That might be a generational thing a little bit, right? I mean, because like my generation of Korean Americans have been in America for pretty much our whole lives. You know, we're acculturated to Western style philanthropy, but also know a little bit about our cultural practices. So that's what we did. Like we tweaked, for my giving circle, we took a cultural practice and sort of tweaked it and made it philanthropic to fit, in a way, what we were all doing in terms of mainstream giving in America. So I wonder if there's a way, I mean, my mom and dad and my aunties and uncles, they might still be involved in their cause that's going to be different than the way I would interpret.
We want to see if anybody in the audience has a question. I don't know if someone, yeah, you have the mic right there. Right here, there is a question.
Thank you.
Just
Hi.
say your name and.
Yes, hi, my name is Jessica Salguero. I'm with the Deloitte CSR team based here. And I had a comment mostly for Holly, sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly. Are you familiar with the Hudson Institute's indices of giving and remittances?
Nope.
Because I think they come out every year, every other year, but their most recent ones came out very recently, and they are looking to expand their research on remittances, and your idea about looking into these cultural circles may be something of interest to them. So just wanted to share that if you weren't familiar with
Thank
their
you.
research.
Anyone else?
Next to her.
There's someone over there.
Hello, I'm Nisha Patel. I direct a project here at the Urban Institute, but I'm actually going to ask my question in a different hat, which is a few years ago, I co-founded a giving circle. And Hallie, we've met before because we've learned a lot from your circle. And I don't know if my co-founder is here, but he should be here shortly. But it was the Masala Giving Circle, which is Mid-Atlantic South Asians leveraging assets. But based on that experience, I actually have a question for all of you about sustainability. And I wish your platform had been around when we started. But so we founded the Giving Circle, did 3 years of giving, I think maybe $50,000. And what we found was that it was a challenge to actually keep, and we were actually trying to get more younger people, I won't use the M word, but younger people engaged. And it was challenging to do that. And we also had some people who were very happy to write a check or contribute, but sort of didn't want another level of engagement in terms of the community education and sort of necessarily the social capital that goes along with it. So my question is about sustainability. So as the landscape of philanthropy is changing, like with your platform, with Growth Fund, like how important or not do you think it is? Asian Women Giving Circle has been around for 11 years, but is it just as valuable if you do something for a year or as a one-time thing or for 3 years? Because I feel like attention spans are getting really short. People are mobile and move in and out of different communities. So just interested in any thoughts on that. And, even big philanthropy, you're starting to see more and more foundations that are saying, we're going to sunset. We've done what we want to do, or we're going to set up, but we're going to give away all of our assets. So.
Yeah. And you wanna...
Well, I will answer with my global impact hat on, not just the platform. I think, and I would think that probably both of you guys would echo this. I think if you're giving money, you have a responsibility when you're giving those funds to the programs that you're giving them to, and that responsibility is sometimes in direct proportion with the amount of money that you're giving. So we've certainly, Global Impact represents 130 international NGOs, and at large scales right now, they're being impacted by DFID and USAID changing policies and changing budgets and that sort of thing. So, we're seeing at this very macro level, but I think it can apply, that same viewpoint applies all the way down to small donations, which is don't over-restrict your funds, try not to. Try to trust the people that you're giving to. And as you're giving in larger and larger amounts of money, talk to the program people, understand what you're doing with your money. I think that it's the relationship and the conversation that fosters sustainability as much as the mechanisms. So I still think one-time gifts are great. People rely on those. Programs rely on those as well. But I think partly there's the larger investment you make, the more strategic you need to be.
Yeah.
Sustainability of the giving mechanism as opposed to the grantee.
Yeah, I think there's no right way to do a giving circle. That's sort of the beauty of making a giving circle or being part of one, right? Is that they're every single one of them has a different personality. Every single one of them, there's formal, informal, 501s, not 501s, fiscal, everything. So I think, but I would bet that in the 3 years of the Masala Circle, I don't know, ask your members, but I would bet that something was gained for each of you in that circle, and something was gained about you guys having these values-based conversations within that circle. I bet, and that I bet you guys are pretty proud of moving $50,000, which I'm going to bet is more than each of you could have done on your own. So the power of pulling money. So I would bet that sometime in your future, you will probably do some sort of moving money together or organizing my block to do something together. And some of those skills that you experienced in your circle, that would be my bet.
For those watching online, again, events@urban.org is the method to submit your question. There is a question about storytelling, and this reminds me, I was the head of a nonprofit organization here in Washington, D.C. We had a night storytelling program that actually drew a great crowd with many, many perspectives, demographically diverse. Do you have any experience in your work around storytelling?
I'm also an educator. So for me, being able to tell a story, to pull someone in is important. So second to story, to being an educator, I'm also marketing communications person by trade. And so you have to be able to tell a strong story. I did a workshop up at Johns Hopkins last spring as part of the Social Innovation Boot Camp that they have there. Their Social Innovation Institute had a boot camp, and so I did a session on storytelling. And you would not believe how many people who had small, grassroots startups hadn't thought about the concept of storytelling in order to raise money, right? Every email you get, every piece of marketing material you read should tell a story in some way. So whether it's a kid, hey, this is John, and, John did X, Y, and Z. It's all about storytelling. So I think that the best nonprofits who raise large amounts of money in some way, shape, or form have put storytelling at the top of their priority list, because within every story is an opportunity to raise money. And how else are you going to get money if you're not telling a story, right? So you just sat here and you told us an entire story about the, well, not maybe the entire, but you gave us a glimpse into, the Korean culture. And as you were talking about it, I'm just imagining like, oh yeah,
You wanted
wow.
some kimchi.
Right, I did. No, I really did. But yeah, I think storytelling is part of it, and that's how you get people excited about the work that you're doing. And once you finish telling that story, you're like, oh man, yeah, I absolutely get that, And so I think that storytelling is important, and you cannot overlook that. And if you don't have anybody in-house to do it, hire someone, get a volunteer to do it.
We all do it. We all do it. It's fundamental. We all do it. And we fund that. I mean, our Giving Circle believes it so strongly. That's what we fund. We fund storytellers who are using many, many different, all the mediums that you can think of to tell stories. And really, if you think about it, I mean, there is a place for advocacy, there's a place for op-eds, there's a place for legal, all of that. But to move hearts and minds, pictures, words, images, stories, that's how change happens.
We have a couple questions here. Oh, we have one in the back, and then I'll come back to you.
Over there who's had her hand up for a minute.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Hani. I'm with ANERA, the American Near East Refugee Aid. I love Global Impact. They're the best. So thank you guys for the work you do. I'm not getting paid for this. I just love them. My question is for actually those who are in the minority fundraising. How much do you notice of a generational difference between charity stays at home, or you send it back to the, say, Korean community that needs help, or, say, Katrina, like what do you see this? Do you see a difference between the generation between your donors? And that's something I'd like to know more about. Thank you.
So we covered that a little bit.
I don't know that much about remittances home, but I can tell you that there is not a robust Asian American philanthropy in America right now. There are some pretty big money-raising foundations that send money back home, whether it's to China or Japan or Korea or India, but there isn't a big, robust Asian American, and it's kind of true in the African American community, and it's kind of true in the Latino community, and it's kind of true, I don't know. That's another interesting research project.
That's another research question. Yeah, right here in the middle, and then we'll come back here too.
Xiao Chen, president of FinTech for Good, and my question is about innovation and sustainability. And when I recently, after I left the World Bank, and then I participate more in China's philanthropy world, and then I heard a lot of when they talk about the philanthropy in China, and there are several barriers. One is that because the philanthropy sector, the salary is not high, and then they cannot attract enough talents. Finally, that this lead to lack of innovation. And the second part is that because of this is connected, and also this is a small community and talking to each other. Finally, it's not the engagement with the external, like private sector and other sector, was not the most effective. Finally, the most innovative instrument which are used outside of philanthropy community is not being introduced there. And these are the two main barriers for China philanthropy. And I want to just see that from your experience and from the inclusive, like including other community, and two is from innovation side, that do you see, from those years you have been working on this, what are the most innovative things that you see as for instrument to mobilize new funds and new capital? Yeah.
I'll take one stab at that, which is, what I do know about China is Red Nose Day is coming to you guys. So we represent Comic Relief here in the US, and Red Nose Day is coming to China this year for the first time. And one of the things that they learned was the digital expression and the technology was paramount to actually mobilizing funds in China at an individual level. But it seems to me that that expression of something that big, that raises £1 billion in the UK, it's raised $60 million here in the US, sends a signal of something opening up in China in a different kind of way. We've done a significant amount of research on philanthropy on a global basis. We do a report called Giving Beyond Borders. And one of the things that we noted in China in particular is that private sector, there's room for private sector involvement, especially in terms of foundations that are connected to private sector. There's a lot of new wealth. and families, and this may then translate into giving circles, but families that are creating new technologies and new businesses and are becoming quite successful quite quickly are creating foundations and are moving money. Now, what you asked was a very, very complicated question, but there's indicators, I think, in China in particular, that the philanthropic outlook is changing.
Yeah. One question right here. I'm sorry, all the way to the front.
Over there.
And then another. Oh, and I'm missing this side. I'm sorry. Thanks for reminding me.
Hello, my name is Chris, and I'm with the BMW Foundation Responsible Leaders Network. Holly, I really appreciate, and if I can paraphrase what I thought I heard you say earlier, that a tradition is an innovation that has lasted. So I really like this.
That's better than what I said.
I really.
That's a really cool.
Can you say that one more time?
Well, tradition is an innovation that lasts, and I'm really excited about that and taking an existing and proven cultural thing and adapting it for a time and a context. So I love that. My question is, how do you hold in balance that concept or that model of success versus the shiny object syndrome that we all face in this like increasingly manic world? Yeah. So just as a
That's
general
a good question, and it's related a little bit to the masala question of the circle back there. To me, I think there isn't really a secret sauce, right? I mean, but one of the things that I think that has worked for our circle is that we started with the idea of a ge, which is a Korean idea, but in our circle, there's South Asian, there's Bengali, there's Japanese, there's Chinese, there's Taiwanese, there's it's a very Pan-Asian circle, and we also are aged in our 20s to our 70s. So we're obviously not being rigidly Korean about how we're doing this thing, I mean, but I think that what we can hold, we can distill the democracy, the consensus, the idea of taking turns, like we're sort of holding on to some of the key parts rather than sort of rigidly holding on to a cultural thing. I also think that especially in these times, the Giving Circle for me, and I think one of the values of Giving Circles for I forgot your name, the Misala, Nisha, is the community. I'm not in college anymore. It's been a long time. I'm not in book groups have never really been my thing. I don't go to church, this community for me, especially now, has become really important. It's a place where I share values, where I respect my, the smart women that I'm in this circle with. We eat together, we have fun together, we make decisions together, some of us travel together. It's an important community, and I think that's one of the things that has contributed to our lasting.
I think that you said traditions that have been able to carry on. I think back to this whole survival piece, right? When you have to, you make it work. And so being able to sustain for this long, I think speaks to the necessity of whatever it may be. And so in these times, you think about the things that are important to our communities and to our various generations. I think whatever you are able to create, it's going to sustain as long as there's a need for it. And as long as there's a need for it, there's probably no question about how you're going to do it. You just have to make sure that you're doing it with people who are equally as passionate as you are. And so I think from an ethnic sort of ancestral standpoint, when you've had to, you just had to survive, and there's no other way to it. So.
Yeah, I had a question, but we're going to turn to one more person here, and then.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gustavo. Great panel. Thank you so much. I think I may be an official representative of the baby boom generation of philanthropy.
All right.
So I'm a proud banner carrier of the baby boomers. I have children who are millennials. And one of the areas in which I've focused in my career has been traditional philanthropy, the big foundations. I've served as a general counsel of one, I've been a president of one, and I'm on the boards of a couple. So as I think about what you folks are discussing in your panel, one of my questions is, how do you actually interface with the foundations? Do you think that you've optimized the relationships that exist there, and are there some opportunities for future collaboration? Thank you.
So I am excited to say that in ways, yes, we have. So with the Kellogg Foundation, I've had the opportunity to speak at interface with them, particularly their the Black women that they have in leadership there. The Lilly Foundation at Indiana University, the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy has actually been a funder for a couple of years for the summits that, that we've had. As I mentioned, Johns Hopkins as well, their social innovation lab. So I think that our way of getting close to the larger foundations has been through opportunity to engage with our constituents, with the folks that we help to train and work with. Particularly with Indiana University and the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, they were really excited because they were stepping into the space of diversity within the schools, also through their PhD program. And for them, philanthropy was important, or is important. And so the diversity of philanthropy for them meant a lot. And so to be able to partner with us and work with us to talk about it in a space meant a lot. And to be able to have funding for them said a lot for us. For Kellogg, of course, they have their Communities of Color report that they've done and the work that they're doing there. So those are just two examples of organizations, larger organizations, that we've had the opportunity to work with and get funding, as well as the United Way. They've been an unyielding supporter of us for a while. And so I think that, again, our constituents that we work with and the groups, my peers, that they're able to see that we are, viable potential board members in the future. We are potential donor groups, if not existing donor groups. And so for them, it's an opportunity to step in front of what we do. Oh, and how could I forget, if they're watching, sorry, Wells Fargo Advisors. They have been a committed supporter of our work, and that is because for them, financial literacy and financial education has been important. So when we do any of our workshops and trainings around wealth building, they've come in and they've done educational work for us there. So again, it's really about getting in front of an audience that they want to get close to and be able to educate and train. And so for us, that's really important, and that's been something we're really proud about.
So we have one more question before we close the panel. And Sarah, in her opening remarks, talked about the current environment. Proposed federal budget. So there's a person that is going back to that issue and is asking, how can philanthropy successfully involve more people to steer and inform community solutions in light of what we're seeing, the budget cuts and the effect that this will have, and how philanthropy can fill the gap with so many worthy community solutions that may be at peril.
It's kind of what Sheena said. I think a lot of us, I certainly believe in the role of government for sure, but philanthropy in its big form and also in its grassroots form can do a lot in terms of engaging people, everyday citizens, with issues that impact their local tree pit and playground, all the way up to their neighborhood and then up to their city. Local involved, engaged citizens is what this democracy is all about. And if we can do that even more and move money as part of that, then I think that's an incredibly valuable contribution.
And the type of solutions that you're proposing as well?
Well, for me, I think that, the U.S. in particular, individuals gave $1 billion away a day last year. And so that has an incredible impact on the world. And we have a global framework in which to view philanthropy now with the Sustainable Development Goals. I would encourage people to connect into those goals and find where they fit, whether it's local or global, because that's what we need and that's what the world is focused on for needed change.
Ebony, last word?
Yes. I think that it's important that we continue to take care of one another, and I think where big government is not able to do that, we've obviously proven it for a long time. We can continue to do that within our community. So I think that philanthropy will be able to help to take care of one another and just treat each other well. I know it sounds very cliche, but in the times that we're in, I think we need one another more than we need big government.
Okay. We've run out of time, but let's give the panelists a big round of applause for their contribution.
Thank you.
panel on reimagining philanthropic resources. I have to say, I thought the first panel was incredibly insightful, and as Sheena started us off by saying, let's get excited, I think that panel certainly did that. And I was so excited, I scribbled so many notes all over the notes that I was going to use to introduce our panelists and raise questions. So let's see how this goes, because I can't read them anymore. But I guess the lesson is either to not go second or to go to less interesting summits. And I think I'll choose the first going forward. My name is Solomon Green. As Sarah mentioned, I'm a senior fellow here in two of our centers, our Metropolitan Housing and Community Policy Center and our Policy Advisory Group. And my research focuses on strategies to reduce inequalities in cities. My background's in housing and land use, but increasingly looking at how technology can play a role in addressing inequalities, in particular spatial segregation, which is an interest of mine. Probably most relevant to our discussion this afternoon, for 6 years, I worked in traditional philanthropy, institutional philanthropy at the Open Society Foundations. And it's been 3 years since I've been out of philanthropy, and I have to say that first panel in our conversation this afternoon makes me realize how much can happen in 3 years, because so many things, the innovations that we've been talking about already, and that we'll hear more from our panelists here, are just accelerating the pace at which philanthropy is changing. I think it was right when I was leaving Open Society Foundations that I tweeted my first donation, and now that I think that is a fairly commonplace practice. So it's really exciting not only to see the pace, but the other thing that struck me, and maybe we can kind of bring some of these themes up again in this panel, is that in the first panel, it seemed like a lot of the technology and innovation wasn't distancing us from the ways in which we give and who we give to, but actually bringing us closer, replicating or amplifying existing ways in which people may want to naturally give or are familiar with giving, and also bringing donors closer to the causes that they care about, not distancing them. So I found that really refreshing in the first panel. Unlike if the first panel was focusing on how we give, this panel is really about what we give. And innovation, not just in the platforms and the rapidity and the methods through which we are able to give philanthropic resources, but how we define the range of philanthropic resources that are available to drive social change. And we have three fantastic panelists here to explore that topic together. Immediately to my left, we have Dale Pfeiffer, who's the founder and CEO of Good World. Then we have Melinda Rolfs, who's the Senior Director for Data Analytics at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. And Stephanie Thomas is a Senior Associate at the Impact Fund America. And we're going to also ask each of these panelists to introduce themselves and their work to kick off the conversation. But I want to remind everyone, both here in the room and online, that we do see this as an opportunity to learn from each other, both across the panel and with you in the room and joining us online. So please do take advantage of the question and answer period that we'll have following the discussion here on the stage. And also, please continue to use our hashtags for this event, Live at Urban, hashtag Live at Urban, which you see on the screen behind me, as well as hashtag Giving Innovation, can both be used to join the conversation online. So Dale, I'm hoping we could start with you to tell us a little bit about Good World's work and how it helps expand the philanthropic resources that are available to drive social good and social change.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today, and thanks to the Urban Institute and everyone who's supporting this event and all the hard work that I know went into pulling it together. It's a very, very timely topic. So I am Dale Pfeiffer. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Good World, and we're on a mission to blow open social media as a fundraising channel for charities. It's been my personal mission now for about probably going on 5 years. I've been just, laser-like focused on this issue. And first of all, I should ask, can everybody understand me? Because there's a very thick New Zealand accent that you're dealing with. Solomon has also offered to act as a translator if people can't understand me. So, but I arrived, and I'm a recovering academic. I used to run a research centre at a university in New Zealand called the Centre for the Study of Leadership, and I came out here to research behaviour and networks, and I ended up in the philanthropic and nonprofit world in New York City. And when I came out of the world of academia, this was in about 2009, 2010, and what I all of a sudden realized is that, what I've been kind of learning about in my experience of philanthropy was actually really, really different to, some of the things I was experiencing inside of the nonprofits that I was working in and foundations in New York. And specifically the way that people were raising money. For a very good reason, a lot of big nonprofits were really set up around the model of, going and finding high net worth individuals and, targeting in them and getting them to write bigger checks. And, in organizations that are so short on resources and things like that, you really got to, focus on your big ticket items sometimes because, you don't have all the bandwidth that you want to do other things. But what I realized is that the way that my friends and I were actually learning about the causes that we wanted to donate to was on social media. And, and I think that has, since that time, really escalated. And I came very, very focused on figuring out a way. And I think, a lot of people had sort of tried to raise money on social media. And, in some cases had success, in some cases failed. But the numbers were very clear that only 2% of charities who had a Facebook page have raised more than $10,000 on social media. So I really dedicated myself to solving this problem. How can we make it instant, viral, and secure to make a donation on Facebook, Twitter, and beyond? And then I kind of identified this problem and identified the technology that I thought would actually enable people to donate on instantly on social media. And then I was frantically building it, and the Ice Bucket Challenge happened. And all of a sudden there was this huge charitable giving movement on social media. Everybody's throwing buckets of water over other people, whatever. And, it was a huge success. It raised more than $115 million. But if you went back and you really study the data and you peel everything back, it had less than a 2% conversion rate once again. So, and actually when we launched about 2.5 years ago now, the ALS Association was our first charitable giving partner. And the chair of the board got up on stage and said that he thought they could have raised 2 to 5 times as much money if they had been using us. And so, I really advocate, I think, the time really has come for fundraising on social media. And we can go into, right now, you're just starting to see so many more organizations fundraise on social media. You're beginning to see also the wonderful Facebook tools that are coming into the space and really, generating a lot more giving in the area. And I think it's a huge opportunity. It's kind of one of those greenfield spaces where people are really starting to kind of come into it and ask and things like that. But what we're seeing is not necessarily like the bigger nonprofits with the huge brands and, the big budgets that are actually beginning to take this greenfield space. It is, some of them are the small mom and pop animal rescues. We all have kitty photos and, photos of dogs and things like that on social media. Well, a lot of these organizations have really invested in building communities around their social media assets. And those are the ones that are really coming and really starting to get the mind share of the younger, and it's not just millennials, it's Gen X donors as well, who are really giving a lot on social media. So exactly what Good World does and is we have created hashtag donations. So we've created the ability for somebody to be able to tweet a donation at a nonprofit. And quite often what the nonprofits are doing is they're putting out a donatable tweet, and people just need to come and retweet it to donate. Once they retweet it, the charity tweets back at them through our technology, tweets back at them with a link, and it's a quick one-time sign up, then they're in the system, and they never have to leave their social media feed to donate again. On Facebook, we light up the comments section for hashtag donations. So a charity will put a post out, and it will tell people to comment hashtag donate in a dollar amount in the comment section below. If somebody comments that quite often, will donate with an expression of how they feel. There might be a big earthquake, and somebody might go hashtag donate $100 to this terrible disaster. Please join me. That sort of thing. And then we do 2-click website donations as well. So the idea is to kind of make it instant and viral and secure.
Wow. Great. And Melinda, we have had a pleasure of being able to work a bit together, and thank you again for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth and what you've learned through your work about changes in philanthropy?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And so what's MasterCard doing here, right? So MasterCard created the Center for Inclusive Growth as an independent subsidiary to address the issue of income inequality. And we do this by combining our technology, our expertise, our data, and philanthropic investments to uncover new approaches and actionable insights that we then share with our community that's working on the front lines of inclusive growth. So there's 3 main efforts that we have at the center. We have an academic research effort, which has a group of senior fellows from very prestigious universities that advise and also publish research. We also have a programmatic effort that has a focus on micro entrepreneurs and supporting them, and that's a global focus. And then we have a data for social good focus, which that's the responsibility that I have. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, that data for social good is in its infancy, so we are clearly at just the beginning of our journey. So I'll give you a little bit of a personal note on how I ended up here. I moved to the center in April of last year. I started in Advisors. Mastercard Advisors is the consulting arm of Mastercard, and they leverage the company's anonymized and aggregated transaction data to provide commercial services to merchants and financial institutions. So that's the commercial side of the business. We're strictly philanthropy at the center. So there was a period of time when I was at Advisors where there seemed to be one major international natural disaster after another. And in our offices, there's one of those big screen TVs with CNN on it. And I was just constantly seeing these images of people who had so little to begin with, and they lost absolutely everything. And so it got me thinking, what can we do as a company? Something big, right, that we can, so that we can help, so that we can have an impact. And so the thought was that maybe there's a way we could leverage our data and our analytics for social good. Perhaps if we could see the trends in individual charitable giving in our data, that we could provide that to nonprofits for free. And so essentially creating a form of data philanthropy. So one thing that's really cool is we have an annual innovation contest. So I entered this idea into that contest, which was a great platform because it forced me to think of this holistically. And the more research I did, the more I realized that there was an information gap for nonprofits. For-profit companies have been using this type of data and analytics for years. But for nonprofits, there was really a gap in granular, timely information. So fortunately, that idea won that year, which was very exciting, and led to a great opportunity for me to make a career change into philanthropy. And so, as I mentioned, I moved to the center from Advisors. So what happened to this concept? It's now what we call Donation Insights, and it consists of a report and a data set that aims to answer questions on individual charitable giving. Questions such as, are people donating more or are they donating less? Which types of causes are they donating to? When are they donating? How are they donating? And what things impact donations? So this is free. We just launched it in December of last year. Yesterday we came out with our second edition, which is very exciting. You can go on our website at mastercardcenter.org and download it. And we would love to hear from the experts. I mean, that's really the goal of this, is we are not the experts on this topic. But we do think we can help fill a gap. And so we are encouraging you to look at the report, review the insights, look at the data set, analyze it, but importantly, give us feedback. Tell us what insights you see or what new things you think we could add to the report going forward so that everyone can benefit from it. So for us, that's going to be the impact. It's early days for us. Like I said, we just launched it in December of last year. But I think if you go on, the data set's quite rich. It has monthly data that starts back in January of 2009, and it's currently through December 2016. With a view of total donations, and it's broken down into 9 different categories.
Great. It's so interesting because what you're doing actually touches upon this topic at 2 different levels in terms of your data philanthropy as a resource, but also understanding, using the data to understand trends in broader giving. So hopefully during the discussion we can get to explore both those aspects of the Mastercard Center's work. And Stephanie, if you could tell us a little bit about, there's another level to this, which is the double bottom line of doing good while generating revenue and driving resources into communities that have been starved of resources or lack resources. And I want to hear a little bit about your work at Impact America Fund and how it's broadening the range of what we think about as philanthropic resources.
Yeah, sure. So, again, thank you for having me. Happy to be here. I think part of it is me sitting on this stage is also reflective of what's happening where you're having folks who work in different verticals, right, of so the spectrum of social good coming together and having these conversations around their work and how we can figure out where there's what I call the connective tissue, right, around the outcomes we want to see. But, we all may do it somewhat differently in terms of how we deploy capital. For Impact America Fund, we are taking a venture capital approach to philanthropy. We started in 2014 under the leadership of the general partner and founder, Keisha Cash. She had worked on a pilot portfolio before that time, working with under-resourced entrepreneurs on the West Coast, and was able to take that work and refine a thesis around a broader group of marginalized folks across the country, looking at low to moderate income groups, in particular in underserved groups, especially communities of color in urban centers. And so with Impact America Fund, we are a venture capital fund. We have a commitment to social impact where we think about it in 3 different ways. One can be related to education. A second way can be related to health and wellness. And the third is related to economic sustainability. We have $10 million in assets under management. It's our first fund, and we've already deployed a significant amount of that capital across a small pool of companies. We're at 8 companies today. We'll probably close out our first fund with about 10 to 12 investments in total. we sit at the nexus of technology meets social impact meets what we call these conscious entrepreneurs who really care about impact, but they're also very business savvy, and they know how to leverage technology to scale businesses in a profitable way, but also in a way that does good for community. You know, we really believe that the folks we're investing in are true builders of what we call a new economic infrastructure that's going to really influence how markets play a role in society. And what we're seeing today is more of a convergence of sort of capitalism with social impact. And the term of the day I'm hearing is around sort of this conscious capitalist, right? And how do you marry the two, and how do you do it in a way that's very thoughtful, that's not exploitative, that creates sustainability and generates profits in a way where they can be reinvested in the community to continue to expand on the impact that's created. And so, you know, you think about, you know, what's happening today, a current state of things from an economic standpoint as well as a social standpoint. You know, you think about wealth gaps, right? And, you know, for every dollar of, you know, average white household wealth, there's 6 to 7 cents on that dollar for Black and Latino household wealth. You think about, you know, labor markets in the economy and folks who are shut out of jobs opportunity. You also have to think about the 5 million in disengaged youth and what's going to happen with them and their participation and role to play as they become adults. You also have to think about the millennials and the emerging, you know, generation of leaders who are, you know, very active, right, in terms of social movements, very highly educated, but often, you know, are facing challenges on the financial side in terms of being unemployed, underemployed, and then having to figure out ways to make up the difference on how they are accumulating wealth and income over their lifetime, which is not on par with how their parents have done it. And so, you know, these are, you know, challenges, right? These are issues, but I think for Impact America Fund, we see them as ways to seed opportunity. You know, you think about wealth gaps. You know, when there's a report out there that says that it's going to take 228 years for the average Black family to catch up with the average white family's wealth, well, that takes a huge shift in public policy initiatives, and it completely, you know, discounts the concept of compounded interest, right? So, you know, is that really, you know, a way that is something we should be focused on, or should we be more focused on quality of life, starting there? What does that mean as a baseline? And then what is, you know, implied from what needs to happen in terms of income and wealth to make sure people can sustain that quality of life? When you think about the disengaged youth and the labor economy, you know, is it really about giving them any job, or is it really about helping them repurpose their lives in a way where they feel good about the work they're doing? They can be empowered to be economic engines locally in their community, create fabulous goods and products and services for the people they care about, right? And just feel good at the end of the day, and continue to live out their lives in that way, very independent economically. And then we think about millennials and thought leaders and folks who have great ideas, who are very ambitious. You know, we've met folks obviously outside of that generation, but just thinking about who's coming up, right? Who's going to be leading these efforts. You know, a lot of these folks are just constrained resource-wise, or they don't have access. And so we feel like we can come in to reallocate a lot of the capital that's already out there in a way that's very thoughtful, where we can have these conscious entrepreneurs who give a damn about community. They want to impact community on a high level. They want to make it sustainable, where it's a for-profit venture. But they're also very smart about how they're leveraging innovation in their business models to say, hey, we want to impact community and the people, you know, around us that we care about. But we also want to leverage their skill sets as well. And so how do we really disrupt the entire value chain so that we're not just impacting at the sort of end user transaction level? You know, we're really providing jobs where people can be not only consumers, but employees of a company, producers, right? And even one day, you know, eventually an owner of an organization that can give back, not just financially, but sustainably through a social impact context. So that's Impact America Fund. I mean, we really feel like technology is a way that can help accelerate the development of disadvantaged communities in America. And we feel like there are, you know, billions of dollars in terms of opportunity just in the U.S. alone where we can tap into that.
Great. Well, I wanted to follow up with you, Stephanie, because again, I'm going to go out of script because I can't see what I wrote earlier. So Gustavo's excuse was it was his second week. Mine is I have chicken scratch for handwriting. But I wanted to ask you, so your work is also operating at multiple levels, because on the one hand, you're redeploying private capital to stimulate for the public good, but your grantees, right, are also rethinking philanthropy. And I know one of your grantees, Hand Up, is you kind of approaching giving in a different way. Could you tell us a little bit about that work in particular?
Yeah, so Hand Up is a startup that we invest in.
I shouldn't have said grantees, investments.
Investment, yes.
Yeah.
So for-profit organization that's really thinking about how to redistribute capital that's come through charitable giving. You think about $55 billion in dollars comes from charitable giving, but what happens to that money, it's a little murky. We don't always know. And then you still find people who are supposed to be beneficiaries of this money still struggling to make ends meet and to have the ability to have basic needs met. And so what Hand Up is attempting to do is basically look at social services organizations that are on the ground who understand, folks who have basic needs that aren't being met and who need this capital, and how they can leverage technology to make them smarter about how it's distributed. So using back-end data analytics reporting around dollars received as well as dollars used on beneficiaries. One thing that's truly cool from our perspective is that they're actually giving a voice back to the people who need these resources. So it's on the one hand, you have a lot of people who need money to make ends meet, whether it's to pay a bill, right, or to pay rent. But then there's the other side to it where a lot of these folks aren't raising their hand, obviously, and saying, hey, I need a handout. They really want to feel like they can have some accountability around how they're able to get access to these dollars, and then being able to tell the narrative around why they're in the situation that they're in, so that it's not a negative connotation associated with it. And so Hand Up's been able to allow people who need these resources to come out, tell their stories of why they're in their financial hardship, and being able to garner support no matter where they are, to people around the world, donors, to your point around making it much more a closer connection between the donor and the beneficiary. And Hand Up's been able to do that in a very thoughtful way. And the last point on that is, not only are they allowing people to sort of reclaim their narratives around their economic hardships to crowdsource funding for their needs, but Hand Up is also making sure that as they're building this technology out, as they're building this business out to scale, how can they continue to incorporate the feedback from folks who are, at the ground level, the grassroots social services organizations who know how this is done. And so they're making sure that they're building out the infrastructure in the right way that's very thoughtful across all stakeholders.
Great. And on this theme of bringing donors and causes more closely together, Dale, I wanted to come back to you because the hashtag donate technology, it's easy to understand how that could mobilize resources in new ways, because it makes it so much easier in real time to be able to make a donation to a cause you care about. But potential critique is, well, maybe it makes it almost too easy, because you don't actually need to engage with the cause in a deeper way. And I wonder, what are your thoughts about how social media can not only mobilize more money, but mobilize a deeper connection between donors and the causes? And what does it mean for donor loyalty? Do donors come back to the same causes that they care about over and over again? Or is it more of a kind of sprinkle it around because you can?
That's a great question. I remember picking up the New Yorker a few months ago, and I opened and there was a cartoon on it, and there's these two guys walking along. And one's looking at his cell phone and went, oh man, I think I just butt donated to a charity again.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, pretty much. And I think it's, it's such an interesting question. And, we're just seeing like social media has just been such a major disruptor of late. I mean, we saw it in the last election, it doesn't matter about politics. I mean, the role of that social media came and played inside of that election in terms of setting the election narrative, and all of that was huge, and to the point where some people are now calling social media the new front page. And, I think, it is a really important moment to be able to kind of create engagement on that level, and, you're seeing things like the ACLU movement, and I think one of the things that we're really seeing is that a lot of philanthropy is now happening much more closely attached to the news cycle. So, we're definitely seeing this on our platform, if different issues are coming out and they're in the news cycle, that's the way that we're seeing giving being directed, and we'll come in the next morning, and charities who represent those values are receiving a lot of donations. So I think that's a really interesting trend that we're seeing. I think that the charities that are being really successful in raising money on social media, there's a new approach that we're seeing arising. It's not just a matter of kind of customizing an email campaign. What we're seeing is that the charities that are most successful have really adopted this cyclical storytelling approach, where you might start telling a story the week before by teasing it, and then really engaging with the people who follow you on social media, and then kind of come up to a crescendo where they ask for a donation. So it's not just kind of that one-off post that will necessarily get somebody to open their wallet and make the donation. It is really the evolution of a story, which I think social media allows you to do as a nonprofit, that really creates that moment where where somebody is opening their wallet. And the way that people donating is very, very different as well, because quite often it's like a really amazing thing to be able to express who you are to your friends and the way that you donate, but you don't often want to email a lot of people or directly solicit them. But if you can do it on social media and do it through an expression of what that means to you, we see donations themselves become viral events. Just 2 days ago we had a donation that got over 1,500 likes. And it was on one of our animal charity pages. A post had come in. It was the Beagle Freedom Project. A post had come in, and there was a woman whose dog had died the night before. And, she said, "This is in honor of my dog Sandy, who crossed the rainbow last night. I hashtag donate $100 in Sandy's name." And then all of a sudden you get all these likes, you get donations going on underneath that with people posting photos of their dogs that they love. And so, I think, you're seeing philanthropy move into not just the storytelling of the nonprofit, but the storytelling of the community that supports that nonprofit. So it becomes like a collective story. And when you can create a community that is also, not just telling that story, but really moving into action by telling that story they're donating, I think it's a really powerful thing. And a lot of people sort of wonder about the data. Our donations have very consistently, since the first day we opened through business right up until now, our average donation has been between $28 and $30. So, that's higher than some people think, it's lower than other people think. And, getting somebody in the door like that, most of the donors, 67% of the donors that come in through Good World are brand new donors to that organization. So it's a really great lead gen tool. So that first gift, that might not make a big impact to your bottom line, but what we're seeing is that donors who donate once will quite likely come back. They'll follow you on Facebook, and they'll quite likely come back and donate to your organization again and again. And it's just, then you get the email address, and you can also solicit them through, other means and put them in your traditional funnel. So we are, I do think that, it is off the news cycle, but then once people give to you once, they're more likely to give to you again.
Yeah. I also wonder, just from personal experience, I've had friends, as somebody who used to work in philanthropy and now works at a nonprofit organization, that you want to learn from your friends. What they're, what causes they value in organizations they're investing in, and I wonder if that also has a effect within friend circles, and that you see somebody donating using the Good World platform to a cause, and then people in your friends network do the same.
That is exactly what we see.
Yeah.
We quite often see that spiral off effect, and of course, quite often if somebody writes a donation, it'll come up on their friends feed. They may not donate, they may donate, but they'll quite often like it because it's an act of somebody giving to a charity, and who doesn't like that? And that creates a result in that whole post, and we have our auto replies coming in, so that results in that whole post being elevated. And so, it's also a fantastic advertisement, frankly. It's a communications mechanism as well as a donation mechanism.
Great. Melinda, I want to come back to you with the levels. And you introduced the work you're doing to understand trends in philanthropy, but Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth is also pioneering this nascent field of data philanthropy, and we know that today information is power and has value, and access to better and higher quality information can really move the needle in so many areas. And I know it's new, so I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but because you are, I think, at the vanguard of what I hope and expect will be a much larger movement for private companies to look at ways to deploy their data for social good. What have you learned so far in that aspect of your work?
So I think for us, the biggest thing is really connecting and partnering with the experts, right? And you do that in a way where you learn, but you also have more of a connection with the end user. So when we think about how we could more effectively, I guess, distribute our data, or data in general, I think of it as a kind of as a continuum, right? So if you want to have open source charitable giving data, you could think of it first as kind of this open platform where there's various data sets that go into it, obviously anonymized and aggregated. And then you could do that so that people could get it from the web, right? And that way it's very open and anyone could have access to it. But there's limitations to that, right, on both sides. There's limitations from the perspective of the data provider, because if it is truly open, then there's going to be restrictions around what they're able to share as far as the level of granularity. And from the end user perspective, I think there's issues there because I think there's a large percentage of people, or organizations, I should say, who don't have the bandwidth or the data expertise to combine disparate sets of data and analyze them and so forth. But my thought is that one way to kind of get there, right, would be to first create a consortium of data providers and couple that with a group of nonprofits who have the resources and the data expertise to do the analysis. But then you take that data and you store it in a safe and secure environment, and then give access to only the individuals within that consortium, right? So they're using it, they're analyzing it, and it's more granular than what it may be if it was public. But I think you can get to that end goal, right, of having open source charitable giving data if the goal with that consortium is to create a new data set, right? So you're creating a new data set that's leveraging that more granular data, but it's kind of at a higher level, and it should be in a format, right, that's digestible for a wider range. So there's a bigger audience that can benefit from it.
It's a fantastic idea. We may need a follow-up summit to work out the details. Because I think there is a tendency to just look at the data and say, oh, what we could do with this. But there are legitimate privacy concerns. There are legitimate concerns about quality of the research and thinking creatively. I think this is a place in which it wouldn't, it would actually bring others on board to engage in data philanthropy. So I think we need to work together to figure out how to do this.
This is why it's great to have these conversations.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to open it up to questions and engage in a conversation. We have a lot of them here in the room, and I want to remind people who are watching us online to send their questions to events@urban.org, and we will work you into the queue as well. Let's see, I'm going to start in the back of the room and work my way forward. Someone here? Great.
Hi, good evening. My name is Korede. I'm actually very, I'm glad to be here. I'm enjoying myself just listening to a lot of you speak about your experiences in the nonprofit sector. So about 4 years ago, I had the opportunity of traveling to Nigeria to sponsor hundreds of students in elementary school with school supplies. And with programs like Kellogg Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates program, what are some of the most effective ways, because this is a question I've been thinking about for years, what are some of the most effective ways we can make sure that the target population, be it the children and families, receive the funds on the front end that are being donated rather than being misused by the government? A lot of these issues pretty much happens in countries like Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Ghana. And unfortunately, when I noticed that countries like Kenya or, programs in Tanzania or in China or whatever have you, because of the, well-structured policies that they have in their countries compared to the countries that I mentioned, if you can just give me some feedback or some type of suggestions as far as what can be done to make sure that the target population receive the funds.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think I'll amplify it by saying, as we talk about innovation and democratizing giving, it's also important to make sure that democratizing doesn't mean that abusing giving. And so I wonder if you can respond, if any of you have thoughts about making sure that resources are being are received by and used by the communities that the donor intends and are used well.
I mean, this isn't something that specifically the center has done, but Mastercard has what they call the MC Aid program, and they work directly with NGOs to provide prepaid cards for victims of, for example, of natural disasters. So it's a safer, more secure way than using cash.
And I'm not sure about at a country level. I'm sorry, but I think that there's an increasing amount of tools that we can use. There's an increasing amount of awareness about the importance of funds getting to the place where they're supposed to be, and I think there's increasing amount of stories about that not happening, so there's more public awareness about it. And I think because of that, tools like GuideStar in the US, certainly for charitable giving and things like that, those ratings are one indication of how good a nonprofit is doing in terms of that factor.
You have thoughts?
I'll just quickly say, with technology, obviously you're able to build platforms where you can collect large amounts of data, but then also be able to have that data track what's happening at the beneficiary level. I know there's some startups that are doing that work, so I think that's going to become more and more important. And similar to what Melinda mentioned about prepaid cards, HandUp actually leverages a gift card tool with their social service partners to make sure that cash is actually not being transferred between agencies and beneficiaries, et cetera. But it also allows for a more seamless way to track flows of dollars in, as well as where those dollars are being spent. And usually they have certain retail partners that they leverage for that, to close that whole ecosystem.
Great, thank you. We'll go to the gentleman in the middle.
This question concerns the topic of data philanthropy, which I've heard increasing conversations about. I find it very interesting. And I was just wondering, in the Mastercard experience, if you have had any conversations around placing, well, basically, my thoughts are that a lot of data is essential to making, and I think we would all accept now, data is essential to making good decisions in the 21st century. And that's true in the private sector, it's true for government, and it's also true in the nonprofit sector. But a lot of the data that nonprofits might use to make better decisions about their donors, about their work, lives in private enterprise. So it may live on the servers at a particular technology company, or it may live with Mastercard or someone else. And has there been any thought within Mastercard, or have you heard any conversations around placing a monetary value on that data to encourage companies to donate it and perhaps receive a tax deduction so that nonprofits can use that data directly? Whether or not they have the resources or the capacity is a separate question, but getting the data is sort of a first step. And how do we make that a more common practice? I'm very interested in that topic.
Good question.
Okay, so we haven't really thought about the monetary aspect because we're strictly philanthropy. But what we're really hoping that by what we're doing with donation insights, and we hope more interesting and exciting things will be to come, but we're really hoping that we can lead by example and that we can show the private sector that this can be done in a way that's safe and secure and free, right? I mean, I guess, you know, obviously a company could choose to charge for it. We chose not to, but we're hoping that we lead by example.
There's a gentleman back here who's been waiting, and I will come over to this side of the room as well.
Thank you for hitting this side. Paul Del Ponte, I'm a consultant working with a number of different charities. The panel here did a good job of touching on it. I wanted to hit it a little more directly, and that is in my own work, I saw a huge uptake in inquiries on value-based giving starting on November 9th, and that has continued to expand. I'm working very closely with one effort called 12 by 12 by 12, which is a group of 40 of some of the largest progressive charities that have banded under a social giving platform, and wanted to see what others are hearing along those lines as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so thoughts about value-based giving in the wake of presumably the election, unless something else happened on that day.
So we've certainly seen an increase in giving to, you know, the charities who are calling themselves out as, you know, or trying to work in some of the areas that people are concerned about. So, but, you know, and some of the things that I talked about earlier, you know, we're definitely seeing it based off the news cycle. So something happens in the news, you know, that charity gets more donations that we can. A lot of the donors that we're seeing are these smaller, I mean, it's maybe because they're coming in off social media, but a lot of the, you know, the activity is being shared on social media. And then a lot of the donors are often first time to those charities, from what I saw in our data set when I was looking at it before I came here. But they are that smaller kind of, you know, $30 donation size.
Great. Others want to address?
Well, I'll just add to it. So I've looked at a couple of different startups that are working in this space, and there's an interesting one that's actually applying sort of machine learning technology around extracting social media data based on those type of trends you talked about, where people are reacting or responding to current events, things, or just, you know, anything that's sort of the matter of the day. And they're taking those insights and they're creating algorithms to do sort of these predictive analytics about future donations and likelihood of a donor to contribute large amounts to an issue or a movement. So I thought it's very early, but it's very interesting. And you know, to the gentleman's point about unlocking private data or data that's captured by private entities, you'd be surprised how much data is actually out there that's open source or that you can get just off the webs. And this company is finding some pretty cool ways to hack that. We don't have to rely solely on corporations to get the analytics that they want to provide to their customers.
Great. I'm going to come. Yes. Microphone.
I'm just going to start with a little context. When I started in fundraising in the 70s, Ford Foundation would invest for 2, 3, 4 years, and all those organizations are still living. And so now that I've got my own company, but I've been fundraising for 100 years, we need investment. And I worked at Chase corporate office in New York, and I became very proud of the nonprofit sector. We had staff, we had anything we wanted. It was easy, and I did fundraising for them internally. I designed some model programs, but my clients, who are very well known, getting introduced to the right donors is very difficult. Having the free time to cultivate donors. And then we also get, well, we already gave to the Hispanic community this year. We already gave to the Black community this year. So there are a lot of impediments, and I was hoping you could maybe provide some insight on how it's going to be and how these wonderful, very large organizations, not like Cedars-Sinai Medical Center or the Metropolitan Opera, but they're big organizations, can really get investment funding.
Huh. Great question. So part of the question seems to be, can these new forms of funding really offset big institutional support from organizations like Ford, or? Yeah. It's the sustainability of the, yeah. So thoughts about sustainability of funding, and particularly, yeah.
It's about investment, right? Do you want to? I mean, I think like right now we're seeing like it's a really, really, really interesting time in the space in terms of, you know, we're almost seeing like 3 different types of entities now. There is like the hardcore for-profit, and then there's non-profit, and then there's benefit organizations sort of in the middle. And I feel like, you know, the fantastic work that you're doing around providing a pool of capital for those organizations, you know, that whose objectives are just as much social objectives as they are, you know, business objectives. I think that is really, really important, and we're seeing it emerge, but I still think the ecosystem is really young. You know, and as personally, as a founder of an impact company, it's been really difficult for us to get impact money, and we actually have our VCs are, excuse me, our VCs are from the fintech financial services world, because I think the pool is just, you know, it is a small pool right now. And, you know, and I think this word impact is, you know, really defined in so many different ways across so many institutions, from the nonprofit world through to the funds. But I really commend the work that you're doing, and I think that there is a lot of ecosystem development work that needs to go on, so these for-benefit companies, which kind of sit in between nonprofit and for-profit, can really thrive and grow.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, you know, we took a stake in the ground in venture capital, but you know, there's a whole spectrum, right, of impact capital that has to be deployed. And, you know, venture capital risk is very risky. So there's no doubt about that. But I think for us, you know, being a very small shop, what we've been able to do is partner with larger institutions. And some of those are even our limited partners who've invested in us, right? So even if we don't have necessarily the platform to say, hey, invest in me, and by the way, we're very risky, but we really care about impact, we have partners like, you know, Prudential Financial, right, who's been at this for years and who's seeded investments in various funds around community engagement, right, and impact, and who really care about like location investing and what that means. And so we're able to learn from them, but then also leverage their infrastructure and their resources to get the word out about the opportunity that exists within our fund. But that needs to happen several times over and across the entire spectrum for this thing to really elevate and get to the scale that we want to see.
So I've been told we are out of time, which just surprises me because of how quickly things move when you're having such so many insights. And I regret that we don't have more time to continue the conversation, at least with our folks online. But I hope some of our folks here in the room and you all will be willing to stick around and continue to learn from each other. But really, what an incredible work you each are doing individually. I started by saying about how technology is accelerating things, but of course technology doesn't do anything without leadership, passion, and commitment. And the work all of you are doing embodies all of those things. So thank you, everyone, for sharing your insights and learnings with us today and helping push continually push what it means to give and what it means to be an agent for change. And thank you, Sheena, and of course, thank you to the Gates Foundation for using your philanthropic investments not just to support organizations directly, but catalyze these conversations about how to democratize and innovate in giving. So thank you all.
Hi.